Every generation has to decide what deserves its attention. Today, that choice is becoming increasingly difficult because our attention has become one of the world's most valuable commodities. In this episode, we're exploring why mindfulness isn't just about reducing stress or finding inner peace. It's about reclaiming ownership of your own mind. We'll look at how the modern attention economy shapes what we think, what we value, and even who we become, and why protecting your attention may be one of the most important acts of personal and civic responsibility in this digital age. Welcome to another bonus edition of the MTB Podcast, a segment of the weekly episode that I call Afterthoughts. French philosopher Simone Weil said that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Now, that's a beautiful thought, but it also raises an uncomfortable question. If attention really is one of the greatest gifts we can give another human being, why do we spend so much of our attention on notifications, endless scrolling, algorithmically curated outrage, and companies whose business model depends on keeping us distracted? Somewhere along the way, our attention stopped being something we intentionally offered and became something that was quietly harvested. Maybe that's because we've been thinking about mindfulness all wrong. We've turned it into breathing exercises, meditation apps, and a way to relax after another stressful day. But what if mindfulness is something far more radical? What if it's the daily practice of deciding who and what deserves the focus of your thoughts? And what if that simple decision ultimately shapes the kind of person and the kind of society we become? So let's dive into that in this episode of Afterthoughts. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. As I said, that's a remarkable statement when you stop and think about it. We usually think generosity means giving someone our labor, our money, or our talents. Weil suggests something even more valuable: our attention. To give another person your complete, undivided attention, that's like telling them you matter. Right now, nothing is more important to me than understanding you. But if attention really is one of the greatest gifts we can give another human being, why are we so willing to hand it over to companies that treat it like a commodity? Why are we giving one of the most precious resources we possess to apps that are designed to keep us scrolling, clicking, and reacting? Giving another human being our attention is like buying someone an expensive birthday present. Spending hours doom scrolling on social media is like letting a stranger empty your bank account. They both cost you something, but one makes us feel generous, and the other leaves us wondering where everything went. Last week, we explored self-awareness by asking, who am I? We looked at the fascinating possibility that our inner voice and our ability to reflect and reason and examine ourselves, well, that may have taken thousands of years to develop. This week, we're looking outward. Self-awareness gave us an inner voice. Mindfulness determines where that voice is focused. One helps us know ourselves, the other helps us decide what deserves our attention. And that matters because attention is far more than just a mental habit. It really is your most valuable asset. Wherever your attention goes, your thoughts follow. Your habits follow. Your relationships follow. Even your character begins to take shape around what you repeatedly notice. If you don't consciously decide what deserves your attention, you can be absolutely certain that someone else will. And they're more than happy to use your attention for their own profit. So let's start with a simple but unsettling truth. The apps on your phone are not primarily competing for your money. They're competing for your attention. Money comes later. It comes, but it comes later. In today's digital economy, your attention is the raw material that gets converted into advertising revenue, and product sales, and political influence, and the mountains of personal data that you give these companies. The longer they can keep your eyes on the screen, the more valuable you become to them. If you ever try to contact the Facebook customer service folks, you'll discover that you are not the customer. You and your attention are their product, and they're selling it to advertisers, politicians, influencers, and anyone else willing to pay to get in front of your eyeballs. Economist and Nobel laureate Herbert Simon saw this coming decades ago when he wrote, "A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention." In other words, information was never going to be our biggest problem. We have more knowledge at our fingertips than any generation in history. The real scarcity is our ability to focus on what actually deserves our attention. And the companies behind our favorite apps, they understand this remarkably well. That's why they've invested billions of dollars studying human psychology. Consider something like the infinite scroll. Years ago, reaching the bottom of a page, it was just kind of a natural stopping point. You'd pause, think, and decide whether to continue. Infinite scroll quietly removed that decision point. There is no bottom to your social media feed. There is only more. Then there are notifications, and they rely on what's known as a variable reward schedule. It's the same psychological principle that makes slot machines so addictive. Most notifications that you get, most of them are unimportant, but every once in a while, one of them delivers something rewarding. They're good news or a funny message, or maybe it's social validation. More people gave you the thumbs up and liked what you were doing. Because you never know which one will pay off, your brain keeps pulling the lever. Your brain keeps telling you to check those notifications. Now, layer on top of that the brain's dopamine system. Contrary to popular belief, dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical. Dopamine is heavily involved in motivation and even anticipation. So every swipe, every refresh, every unexpected reward teaches your brain to seek the next hit of novelty. And before long, you're not choosing where your attention goes. Your attention is being trained. If you've ever caught yourself picking up your phone without even realizing why, don't immediately blame your lack of willpower. You're not simply fighting a bad habit. You're facing an industry that has been staffed by behavioral psychologists, neuroscientists, data scientists, and AI systems that learn second by second which buttons keep you engaged the longest. This isn't even a fight. It's your one lone human brain against machines that have been specifically engineered to fracture your focus. Now, the good news is that understanding the game is the first step toward refusing to play it. It's easy to think the attention economy is just making us more distracted. And maybe we've forgot where we put our keys, or we lose track of conversations, or spend too much time scrolling before bed. But the real cost is a hell of a lot deeper than mere inconvenience. When our attention is constantly fragmented, it begins to reshape the way we experience the world. And ultimately, it reshapes the kind of people we become. So here's a simple principle that's worth remembering. You become what you repeatedly attend to. If your attention is being consumed by outrage, you will start to see the world primarily through anger. If your attention is consumed by fear, you'll begin to see threats everywhere. If it's consumed by consumerism, you'll start measuring your worth by what you own instead of by who you are. Attention isn't just about what occupies your mind for a few moments. It's the lens through which your character is slowly formed. That's exactly why the lessons I pulled from this week's readings revolve around mindfulness. Isaiah calls us to notice justice, but systemic injustice rarely announces itself with flashing lights and breaking news headlines. It tends to hide in policies or habits or institutions that quietly disadvantage certain groups of people year after year after year. Meanwhile, we're encouraged to spend our emotional energy arguing over whatever controversy happens to be trending today. Performative outrage keeps us busy while real structural problems continue to go unnoticed. Now, Paul's words in Romans, they point us toward a different way of living. He reminds us that every one of us shares the same human imperfections. Yet the algorithms that are driving our online lives, they don't have any interest in humility. They profit by dividing us into tribes, by feeding us stories that reinforce our own certainty, and by portraying people who disagree with us as enemies instead of just fellow human beings with different opinions. Empathy becomes a lot harder when every headline is designed to provoke an emotional reaction before we've even had time to think. And then we arrive at the encounter in Matthew's gospel. The turning point comes when someone stops seeing a label and starts seeing a person. That's much harder to do when our attention is fragmented. If our minds are constantly pulled somewhere else, the people standing in front of us become background scenery. We stop noticing loneliness or quiet suffering. We stop noticing opportunities for kindness because our attention has already been claimed by something demanding the next click, tap, or swipe. And that's why this issue extends far beyond individual well-being. A healthy democracy depends on citizens who can sustain attention long enough to weigh evidence and understand complex issues, long enough to listen to people they disagree with. When an entire society loses that capacity, outrage replaces dialogue. Slogans replace thoughtful discussions. And compromise starts to look like weakness. That's what we're seeing today. All of that. And the marketplace for your mind doesn't just influence what you buy. It influences what kind of society we're capable of building together. At this point, I think we need to rescue the word mindfulness from what pop culture seems to have done to it. Today, mindfulness is typically marketed as it's a wellness product. It's sold through meditation apps, luxury retreats with scented candles, calming music, breathing exercises that are designed to help us relax after another exhausting day. Now, all right, don't misunderstand. There's nothing inherently wrong, I guess, with any of those things. Taking a few deep breaths or spending time in quiet reflection can be genuinely beneficial. In fact, I do it a lot. And I think more people should do it. But if mindfulness becomes nothing more than a tool to help us tolerate lives that are already misaligned, we've missed something much bigger. Real mindfulness isn't about escaping reality. It's about engaging with reality more fully. Mindfulness is the deliberate decision to reclaim ownership of your attention from the countless forces competing to capture it. It's refusing to let algorithms decide what deserves your outrage, or advertisers decide what you should desire, or political tribes deciding who deserves your empathy. To put it another way, mindfulness is an act of cognitive sovereignty. It's the declaration that your mind belongs to you. That makes mindfulness surprisingly rebellious. Every time you resist the urge to check your phone during a meaningful conversation, you are reclaiming your attention. Every time you pause before reacting to a clickbait headline, you're reclaiming your attention. Every time you deliberately seek out a different perspective, instead of just feeding your own confirmation bias, you are reclaiming your attention. These aren't small acts of self-improvement. These are acts of intellectual independence. This week's readings point in exactly that direction. Isaiah invites us to notice justice. Paul calls us to notice our own imperfections before condemning others. Matthew reminds us to notice the human being standing in front of us instead of the labels that we've attached to them. None of those things happen automatically, though. They all require intentional attention. That's why I prefer to think of mindfulness not as a consumer practice, but as a form of stewardship. Attention is one of the most valuable resources you will ever possess. Like your time, your health, your integrity, it can be invested wisely or it can be squandered carelessly. And once it's spent, you never get that moment back. So maybe the goal of mindfulness isn't simply to feel calmer. Perhaps the goal is to become a better steward of your own mind, to consciously decide what deserves your attention, and to protect that decision from everyone who's trying to make it for you. Because in a world that's constantly competing for your focus, mindfulness notices what matters. So, if mindfulness is really about becoming a steward of your attention, what does that actually look like? I'm not talking about productivity hacks or any trendy wellness routines. I'm talking about small, deliberate acts of resistance against a system that's constantly trying to decide for you what deserves your focus. So start with something deceptively simple. Single tasking. Fuck multitasking. I don't care how good you claim to be at it. Our brains do not work that way. We've been conditioned to believe that multitasking is efficient, but we aren't actually doing multiple things at once. We're just switching our attention so quickly that we never fully engage with any of them. Try doing one thing at a time. Read one article completely instead of skimming 10. Have one conversation without glancing at your phone. Finish one task before chasing the next notification. It's amazing how revolutionary that feels in a culture that is addicted to constant stimulation. All right, next, create phone-free spaces. Maybe it's the dinner table. Maybe it's your bedroom. Maybe it's coffee with a friend. Whatever you choose, protect those moments fiercely. One of the greatest gifts you can give another person is your undivided attention. So every time you leave your phone in your pocket during a meaningful conversation, you're making a statement. This person matters more than whatever the algorithm thinks I should be looking at. Then there's deep reading. Long-form books, thoughtful essays, even challenging conversations. These things retrain the brain to sustain attention over time. They teach us to follow complex ideas, wrestle with ambiguity. They help us resist the temptation to reduce every issue to a slogan or a meme. A deep reading doesn't just give us more information, though. It actually rewires neural pathways in your brain. It strengthens the mental muscles that make critical thinking possible. And finally, I'd encourage you to practice what I'll call radical noticing. Take a walk without earbuds. This is a tough one for me because I have a long list of podcast episodes and audiobooks I'd love to listen to each week. If you don't want to walk, then just go sit in a park without reaching for your phone. Whatever it is, look around you. Notice what's going on. Pay attention to the expressions on people's faces. Observe what they do. Maybe you'll see the small acts of kindness that rarely make the news. Just pay attention to the beauty, the struggle. Pay attention to the humanity that's been there all along. The digital world constantly tells us where to look. Radical noticing is the quiet decision to look for ourselves. So, single tasking, phone-free spaces, deep reading, radical noticing. None of these practices are going to make headlines. They certainly won't go viral, and most people won't ever really try to turn them into habits. But when you use them together, they can accomplish something rather profound. They remind you that your attention belongs to you. They prove to you, they demonstrate to you that your attention belongs to you. And every time you consciously decide where to place that attention, you're casting a vote for the kind of mind and the kind of society that you want to build. Last week, we explored self-awareness, the remarkable human capacity to step back, examine ourselves, and ask, who am I? This week, we've explored mindfulness, which asks a different question. What deserves my attention? Self-awareness built the observer. Mindfulness guides its gaze. One gave us the ability to reflect. The other determines what that reflection is focused on. Without self-awareness, we're driven by instinct. But without mindfulness, we're driven by distraction. That's why I keep coming back to Simone Weil's beautiful observation that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Every day, you give your attention away hundreds of times. Sometimes you give it to the people you love. Sometimes you give it to meaningful work. But all too often, you give it to companies, algorithms, and outrage merchants that haven't earned it and certainly don't have your best interests at heart. If attention is one of the greatest gifts you possess, then treat it that way. Give it deliberately. Invest it wisely. And protect it fiercely. Because every moment you spend paying attention to one thing is a moment you can't spend paying attention to something else. Your attention is finite. Your life is finite. How you spend one is, in many ways, how you spend the other. So I'll leave you with this. Every time you choose where to place your attention, you're also choosing the kind of person you're becoming. Tomorrow morning, when the world begins competing to buy your focus, pause for just a moment and ask yourself, what actually deserves my attention today? That's today's afterthought. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Afterthoughts. If you want to keep up on everything I'm doing, please head over to thecodaproject.com and subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get notifications whenever I publish anything, and I'll keep you updated on the weekly live streams of mythologizing the Bible. If you subscribe for free over at the Coda Project, you'll start receiving my publication called The Weekly Compass. This is a brief guide on a single core value. Think of it as a mini lesson plan for personal growth. It's perfect for families, students, and adults because I include discussion questions designed for different age groups. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to the Guide to Kitchen Table Activism, which is a detailed resource designed to help you be politically active from your own home. The guide provides tools, tactics, and templates for you to use, and it only takes 15 minutes a week. If you care about our democracy, our country, and our world, then I encourage you to check it out. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember to question everything, keep what's good, and live what matters.